record because we do want to put this on our YouTube channel. So we are now recording. I am Andrea Cash. I help the League of Women Voters of North Carolina with their communications. So I helped communicate the message that we were having this session tonight. We are happy to see you all. Thank you for joining us for this important information, this important session. Just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to get right to the main event. This is more of an informational session than it is an interactive one. So for the most part, you're going to want to keep yourself on mute. But we do hope there's a lively chat. If there are questions, we will do our best to answer them. But as we said, we're more giving information than being the experts on this subject matter right now. So yes, for the most part, we're going to keep ourselves on mute and we're going to keep the chat going. And I do want to say that, this is part of a series. You're going to hear more later about what is to come, but obviously check the League of Women Voters of North Carolina website often for our calendar of events. It's very lively right now. There's a lot going on. So there might be events on there right now that are coming up next week you want to be part of. So definitely check that out. I think we're putting a link in the chat. And I think that about covers it. And I am going to turn things over to Sandra Mowell. She is with the League of Women Voters of North Carolina board.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, I'm Sandra Mowell, and I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters of Henderson County. And I co-chair, along with Martha Robley of the Mid-Sand Hills member at large unit, the League of Women Voters of North Carolina Policing Practices Working Group. And members of the working group come from a number of local leagues across the state, and several of us are participating in this program tonight. And our working group was organized in June following the death of George Floyd as we contemplated the continuing racial inequities in our criminal justice system. Our organization's mission is to empower voters and defend democracy for everyone, and defining and dissecting all the issues that contribute to the ongoing problems we're experiencing currently is a daunting and complicated task. For these educational programs, we are looking at one aspect of criminal justice, policing policies. Next slide, please. The League is governed by principles that include the belief that no person should suffer legal discrimination and that the government should be responsive to the will of the people. We also believe a democratic government depends upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. Next slide, please. In order for the League to take action on public policy issues such as policing practices, the members of our organization must first come to an understanding and agreement on that policy. We formed this working group as we realized there's no policy position at the national or state level of our organization that specifically addresses policing issues. And without a policy position, the League as an organization may not weigh in on any legislative solutions that might specifically address these issues. And we know there are a lot of organizations and groups looking at police reform with a wide range of focus. Our intent is to examine the intersection of community with their law enforcement agencies, and more specifically, the need for citizen input into the community impact of policing policies and the need for citizen oversight. But as all good leaders do, the first step is to educate ourselves on what the current policies and practices are. Our series of programs are designed to provide our members and any interested members of the public with information that can be used as a basis for understanding the issue of policing practices in North Carolina. The last program in our series is designed for League members to discuss the possibility of doing a consensus study or concurrence about policing practices in our state. It's for the member delegates at the 2021 League of Women Voters of North Carolina Convention to agree or not on pursuing a public policy position on policing practices. Next slide, please. So we want to start tonight just with a quick poll question so we know who's out there with us tonight. Andrea, if you can launch the poll. We just, like I say, curious who's with us if you are a member of the League of Women Voters or not. And if we have a few people, it looks like, as you're answering, a reminder that the League is open to women and men over the age of 16 who are interested in making a difference in their communities. And we'll put a link in the chat for more information on joining. All right, so that's it. You can, everybody's had a chance to answer. And you can take the poll. You can stop sharing the results there, it looks like. And for those non-members with us tonight, we want you to know we are truly a grassroots organization, as evidenced by this program. Concerned members have gotten together to volunteer their time to educate ourselves and you about this topic. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Ernest Mowell. He's a League member from Henderson County.
Thank you very much. Before becoming a police officer or deputy sheriff in North Carolina, one has to meet certain standards. And we found that the state has 2 commissions that set and enforce these hiring standards and practices. Andrea, can you go ahead and start our first video? Erin Cleghorn from League of Women Voters Wake County spoke with the directors of both of these commissions.
Hi, I'm Erin Cleghorn. I'm a volunteer in Wake County with the League of Women Voters, and I am pleased to be joined today by Director Stephen Combs and Director Diane Konopka here in Wake County. If you would please both introduce yourselves and let us know what associations you work with.
All right, good morning. My name is Stephen Combs again. I am the director of the North Carolina Criminal Justice Standards Division, and I serve as staff to the North Carolina Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission.
And on my side, I'm Diane Konopka. I'm the director of the Sheriff's Training and Standards Division, and we serve as staff to the Sheriff's Commission and also are part of the Department of Justice.
That's wonderful. Thank you both so much for being with us today. Tell us a little bit about how these commissions came into being.
Sure. Going back into the 1970s, there was standardization for justice officers with the formation of 2 advisory councils. And under their regulatory authority, minimum employment and training standards were set for all justice officers in North Carolina. And then go forward to January the 1st of 1980, and the Criminal Justice Standards Commission was formed, and that was formed under Chapter 17C. And at that time, both police officers and deputy sheriffs served under that commission and under the standards formed by that commission. And then moving on ahead to September of 1983, there was a separate commission that was formed, and that was the Sheriff's Education and Training Standards Commission. And it was formed basically because while both commissions work together, sheriffs do have some different responsibilities. They're responsible for court security, for jails and detention centers, and civil process. So the separate commission was formed. I would also like to note that we are the only state, to my knowledge, that has 2 commissions for criminal justice and for sheriffs. But we do work closely together. The commissions work closely together, and as divisions, we work closely together towards our common goals.
That's wonderful that you work closely together. I can see situations so often where commissions might vie for resources. So it's wonderful that you guys are good partners. What would you say are the missions of the 2 commissions?
Well, the commissions are responsible for setting the minimum employment, training, and retention standards for our law enforcement officers, correctional officers, detention officers, and telecommunicators in North Carolina. So, you know, as Diane and you just hit on, you know, we certainly have to work together to be able to do this. And then there's one other part of this trifecta is the North Carolina Justice Academy, who's establishes and does the training based on the rules and what the commission passes. And I'm sure we'll probably hit on that a little bit more as we go. But just to hit on one more about how we work together, we're both members of what's called the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards Training. That's a mouthful. But basically, across the country, people in our positions, it's typically called the post. And it's interesting because when we tell people how we're set up, and Ms. Konopka, Director Konopka hit on this, we're the only state in the country set up like we are. It's interesting to see how well it works, because we tell these others and they're very surprised by this. But I'm here to tell you, in North Carolina, we're a step ahead. We really, really are. And with our training, with our standards, we had this, it works very well for us.
Wonderful. So the CJ Commission has 34 members. The Sheriff's Commission has 17 members. How are the members selected and how long are their terms?
So I'll start with the CJ Commission. Most of our terms are for 3 years, and it's written into general statute as far as who those members are and who they're appointed by. So for my commission, I do have a fairly large commission of 34 members. 3 of those are appointed by the North Carolina Association of Chiefs of Police, 3 by the North Carolina Police Executives Association, 2 by the North Carolina Law Enforcement Officers Association. I have the following, just have one appointment, and that is the North Carolina Law Enforcement Training Officers Association, the League of Municipalities, the Conference of District Attorneys, the North State Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Criminal Justice Association, as well as the Law Enforcement Women's Association. I then have 4 appointments by the governor, 1 appointment by the Attorney General, 4 appointments by the General Assembly, Senate Pro Tem, and 4 appointments by the General Assembly, Speaker of the House. And then I have a number of ex officio members, which includes the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety, the President of the UNC system, the Dean of the UNC School of Government, as well as the President of the North Carolina Community College System, the Commander of the North Carolina Highway Patrol, and the Director of the State Bureau of Investigation. So, and I'll turn it over to Director Konopka for her commission.
Well, I'll be brief. So we have 17 members. Of our 17 members, 12 will always be sheriffs. There are 10 sheriffs that are from the 10 commission districts in North Carolina, and then there's an Eastern at-large and a Western at-large sheriff. And these are appointed in accordance with the bylaws of the North Carolina Sheriff's Association. In addition to those 12 sheriffs, we also have some appointments. We have an appointment about the Speaker of the House, we have an appointment about the Senate Pro Tem, and we have an appointment by the governor, and that governor's appointee must be a county commissioner. And then we also have 2 non-voting members, and they're representatives of the Department of Community Colleges and the Institute of Government.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. You guys have a lot to manage, clearly. Tonight, we're talking specifically about the hiring standards and the hiring practices in North Carolina. Does the commission review all law enforcement officer applications from city and county agencies in North Carolina? And what are the steps in certifying an officer?
I'll touch on that briefly, if I may. We'll tell you from our side of the house, the Sheriff Standards Division, we certify justice officers, and these are deputies, detention officers, and telecommunicators who work for sheriff's offices, and then also telecommunicators from other agencies who voluntarily comply with the commission standards. We also certify them. And the way our process goes is the agency obviously hires the individual, and they complete the hiring process, and then they submit a whole packet of documents to our division. This certification packet is reviewed in detail by our division staff. If all the requirements are met, then we issue a certification. But if there's missing documentation, or if there's some question about an individual's eligibility for certification, then we'll work with the agency to see what we need to do to get those additional documents, or see if we need to do some further investigation. If investigation or a PC review or any of that is warranted, then we'll also communicate that with the agency, and we'll work with that agency towards compliance of that officer. So it's a process basically where they collect the documents, send it to us for review, and then we go from there.
Great.
So administratively, on our side, we do things a little bit different. We mainly work using the same forms, but on our side, we really just get one form from the agency, and we call that the F5A. But that's the appointment form. And on that appointment form, it just has check-offs for all these other reports that they should have done. For instance, that officer met the education requirement, the drug screen was completed, that the fingerprints were completed, and we will receive the fingerprint card and the criminal history check. A psychological screening, that was done. And then the medical history and the personal history statement, as well as the background investigation. So basically they're telling us in this report that they have done all this. Now, how do we go and make sure they've done all of this? Well, I have 5 field representatives across the state that work from home, and their primary responsibility is the audit, to go and audit these law enforcement agencies. So even at our very smallest agencies, we will at least audit 10 officers randomly. And now, of course, some of our departments are even, of course, smaller than 10 officers, so then we just look at every officer. But if you're larger departments, it depends. We have a system set in place on how many that we'll look at. But we go into the personnel files or their files and make sure that, for instance, the F3 personal history statement is indeed in the file, and that the F8 background investigations in the file, as well as their firearms qualifications, the interview, everything that's part of this application packet is indeed there. So these departments know that. They know that we're going to come by. We're on about, well, because of the economy and things that have happened, I had some budget issues in which I have right now, out of my 5 field reps, I have 3 vacancies. The legislature was very good to us this past year and gave us, we're receipt funded on my side, and they gave us an additional $1. That won't kick in till November, but our primary, we want to get these positions filled. So when we are at our full staff level with our field reps, we're on about a 4-year rotation. So with a little over 500 police departments or state agencies in North Carolina, they see our field rep on average about every 4 years, where they'll come in and conduct this audit. So that's it for us.
Wow, that's a lot. So how many then law enforcement officer applications do you all process each year?
I'll give you some numbers here. I will say that as of July the 1st of this year, we had a total of 15,826 deputies who were certified with the commission, total, And then we had 10,511 detention officers and 1,966 telecommunicators. For this year, so far this year, in the first 7 months of 2020, we've received more than 2,400 new applications for certification, and we've issued over 1,100 certifications during that same time period. And then, as I mentioned before, we were processing and communicating with the agencies. We're working on another couple of thousand of those applications as well.
So on the CJ side, we have, like I said, I think approximately right now about 516 police departments. We have a little over 19,000 officers. I say police departments, that also includes state agencies, with a little over 19,000 law enforcement officers. So in 2019, we processed approximately 2,600 applications for law enforcement officers. So I want to be careful and not to mislead you in that. That doesn't mean that 2,600 new officers came on board, because that number also includes officers that transferred from one department to another in North Carolina. So with our system that we have now, we really don't have a way to break that down. We're in the process of going to a new network, and hopefully we'll be able to break that down further. We'll tell you that right now, to date, that for this year, we have processed approximately 1,106 applications. So we're kind of on track for about the same number as we had last year.
And
so, go ahead, I'm sorry.
If I may jump in as well, and again, we're the same way. So when I say new applications, that does not necessarily mean new people, but the officers applying with an agency, and we go through the same process for the new officers and the veteran officers.
I see. And so an example of an agency might be the Capitol Police, for example, or a state highway patrol, different things like that. Would you say those are good examples beyond just departments?
That's right. Yes, ma'am.
Great. All right. Tell us a little bit about the Criminal Justice Fellows Program for recruiting candidates.
Yes, ma'am. This program came about a few years ago, approximately 2 years ago. It was both commissions. First of all, we brought this before both commissions, this program, and they approved it. And we put it in front of the Attorney General. He certainly supported this program. So then we went to the legislature, and the legislature put it into law. So this is a program, basically, many of you are probably familiar with the Teacher Fellows Program. It's very similar to that, and that this program will fund a young man or woman graduating from high school into a community college to receive their associate's degree, and then go to work as a criminal justice professional, whether they fall under what we call 17C or 17E, any of the programs under either one of our commissions. And if they go to work for 5 years after they receive their degree, then that fellowship will be waived. In other words, they're going to school for free. And though the legislature has been extremely supportive of this program, and each bill each year has funded it, it has not passed through the legislature. So once again, we're very fortunate to have an attorney general that understands that education is very important for our law enforcement officers. And so therefore the attorney general has funded this out of their budget at the Department of Justice. And we just started our second class this past fall. Both classes have been very small because in the funding for this program, we have asked for funds to help promote it, because we're just finding that these young men and women in these high schools just do not know about our program. And it's been really tough to try to promote this program when it's not funded. But we feel it will be very successful. We're hearing a lot of scuttlebutt that a lot of different legislatures and task force have been talking about this program. So we're hoping to get some really good news next year, and that it'll be fully funded. And when it is fully funded, it will allow for 100 students to enter the program every year. And you know, there's a lot of studies out there that says education matters, and that's not to knock our officers. We have a lot of good officers that may have only, you know, a high school education or a GED and do an incredible job. But, you know, the more education, I do believe, and most do believe, is better. And so we're really looking forward to get this program really moving forward in the next couple of years.
That's wonderful. Sounds like a wonderful program. Your website indicates that the public is welcome at any commission meeting unless you guys are having closed sessions. But with COVID, are these meetings being made available to the public to attend virtually?
I'll jump into that first. You know, there's been a lot of demand for that lately. For the criminal justice, for our commission, of course, we're a very large commission. We're very fortunate that Wake Technical Community College here in Raleigh supports the commission and allows us to have our meetings at one of their facilities for free, which is, you know, because of some things lately, we had to look at where we would have to have these meetings where it would cost us, which would have been substantial, well over $10,000 a meeting. And I don't have that kind of money in my budget. Yeah. So we rely a lot on Wake Tech. And so we started looking at, is it possible to stream our meetings? We have had to have some of our meetings with in person and with a conference call with our members. But right now we don't have the technology because we depend on what the school has. But we're going to start looking at this technology of at least being able to stream our meetings over the internet. There won't be able to be any interaction, but at least people will be able to observe the meetings. But we're also going to try to get a little bit more aggressive in reaching out to the community across the state and maybe educating them a little bit more on what the commission does and them coming to our meetings. I'll be the first to say, I hope I don't get in trouble here, but they're not always the most exciting things. Sometimes we'll really dive into the weeds on issues, and maybe a lot of people won't understand the conversations that are being had. But, you know, this is where law enforcement in North Carolina, where the rubber meets the road. And there's a lot of great information that comes out of these meetings. And again, back to how we work together, Diane, Director Konopka always attends my meetings, and I also attend her commission meetings. And so both commissions, again, work very closely together, and I'll let Director Konopka talk about what they're doing.
We're pretty much the same. We don't have the technology at this point to be able to do that. And we are certainly meeting at the Wake Tech campus as well. But what we've done a little bit differently with the sheriffs is in the past, we have staggered our meetings a little bit. What we've been doing most recently is maybe have 2 meetings a year. We have 4 meetings a year. We'd have 2 in Raleigh and then maybe 1 in the eastern part of the state and 1 in the western part of the state, hosted by a commissioned sheriff. This year with COVID, we stuck close to home. We had planned some meetings, you know, otherwise, and it just didn't pan out with COVID. So we're in Raleigh for all the meetings this year, but we're hoping next year to be able to go, you know, sort of far east or far west, hopefully, and that allows more members of the public to come if they'd like to. But I will also say too, even though they've always been open meetings, we haven't had a lot of other attendance, and the meetings are pretty dry, but there is good information that comes out of them. The one other thing though that we could offer is, even in COVID, if there was a member of the public or someone who had some business before the commission and truly wants to attend the meeting, we would make, you know, every effort that we could, certainly, for them to come and address the commission in person. But hopefully by the time we get into 2021, this will be distant memory, and we won't be dealing with the COVID issues.
Oh, I hope you're right.
I hope so.
I'd also, our next meeting is in November. I'm not sure how things will be looking in November. As we also meet quarterly, so our meetings are every February, May, August, and November. If anybody watching is interested in attending our meetings, please just reach out to me. I don't know if you'll make my email address available, or I can do that now. But would love to have some representation from this group at our meetings. And so they can just reach out to me personally, and I'll definitely be able to let you know what we're doing and when we're doing it, and if the situation's going to be good for them to come and watch what the work of the commissions.
Thank you both so much for sharing this information, for talking with us about your commissions. This is part of a larger effort for the League of Women Voters to just get information in front of our members and really inform them about what's going on in the state. So thank you so much for doing that. We're going to talk in just a minute about minimum entrance standards, but I want to thank you for being with us so far in the program. So thank you both.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
So now that we know who is responsible for the hiring standards in North Carolina, we want to give you a quick overview of what those standards are. While many of the standards are objective and somewhat easy to verify, some are seemingly subjective and may be difficult to define. Next slide, please. For example, the standards regarding an applicant's criminal history are very specific, but they seem a little confusing. In a nutshell, what this means is the applicant can have no felonies or not too many misdemeanors and nothing in recent history. Individual agencies can have, and some do have, stricter standards than what we see here. Issues involving criminal histories are brought out during the hiring agency's background investigation. Next slide, please. The hiring agency has the responsibility to verify that the employee meets all these standards. The agency has to conduct the physical exams and testing, and also has to complete the required paperwork. This process can take 2 to 3 months just to get an application completed and submitted. Next slide, please. For first-time officers and deputies, one of the standards is conditional. That is, they must attend and pass a basic law enforcement training program approved by the commissions to work in North Carolina. Next slide, please. So at our next program, we're going to focus on training to include the basic, ongoing, and advanced training programs available in North Carolina. And we hope to see you all then. And next slide. The individual agencies will interview the applicants based on the agency's unique requirements. Some agencies will conduct a board interview, while others have a series of interviews with department leaders. And Andrea, can you start the next video where we have additional questions regarding these hiring standards?
Welcome back. It's a pleasure to be here again with Director Combs and Director Konopka. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to talk a little bit about minimum entrance standards. The first few standards seem measurable. You can look at the birth certificate and determine if an applicant is a U.S. citizen and at least 20 years of age. There's a documentation for high school diploma or GED, but moral character seems to be fairly subjective, as we have a wide range of what is considered to be moral behavior across each community. How do local agencies determine the good moral character of candidates?
Let me start by saying that commission standards or minimum standards for certification, and that many employing agencies may have more stringent standards for hiring or employment. But I also want to say, as far as their hiring, we can't speak to what they're looking at as far as good moral standards. We can only speak to certification issues. And as far as certification issues, there's a lot of citing of case law and that sort of thing, but neither of us are attorneys, so we're not going to delve into that either. So I will tell you that generally what our commissions look at regarding good moral character is whether or not there's a pattern of really bad behavior or one act that is so bad or so egregious it might be considered a lack of good moral character. And even when we're looking at those possibilities as division staff, we don't make that decision, but if there is something that's of question, we would take it to our probable cause committees. And both commissions have a committee that's part of the larger commission that's a probable cause committee that would look at any issues that might deem an officer ineligible for certification, either initially or ineligible to maintain that certification under the commission standards. And I can talk just even a little bit more about the probable cause committee. When they make a decision of whether or not there's probable cause for that officer to hold certification, then that information, if there is probable cause found, is sent to the officer. The officer or applicant has the opportunity to request an administrative hearing. If they don't agree with that decision and go through that process, then that matter would be heard at the Office of Administrative Hearings by an administrative law judge, who would then make a recommendation to go back to the full commission, and then the full commission would hear the matter and make that final determination as to whether or not the officer was eligible. And that would certainly apply in cases of good moral character.
I understand.
Just as a follow-up to that, often, we'll be asked we'll get a phone call. And so what good moral character is, it's something that we wouldn't look into. And we'll often get phone calls, say, for instance, someone gets pulled over by a police officer for speeding and they say the officer was rude with them. That's something that's going to be handled at the department level and not necessarily by either standards division. Also, you may see something on the news that talks about an officer that has been charged criminally with a crime. And we will not investigate that until that criminal investigation is complete, because we don't want to involve ourselves in that criminal investigation. Now, a lot of times you'll see during the process of a criminal investigation where the officer has resigned from that department. So we'll often get letters from the public saying, hey, just wanted to make you aware that this happened. And then we'll get a follow-up on how we've looked into this. And so we always try to explain that, say, for instance, if a police officer's been arrested and they resign, whether they were found guilty or not, we would still look into the incident that occurred. But we wouldn't do it until they then applied again to be a law enforcement officer, because we don't have any standing. If they don't hold certification, there's nothing we can do. So a lot of times we may not even ever look into an incident because the officer, for instance, was found guilty of a pretty serious crime, and they probably have a good feeling that their career's done. And so they never apply with the department again. And then for us, after 3 years, if they don't apply with an agency, they then have to go back through our basic law enforcement training and basically start all over again, which is a lot to do. So just some clarification there. It's the question that we get quite often.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Now, tell me, have these standards changed and evolved after they were first developed? And if so, do you have an example of any recent changes to the standards?
They're constantly changing. So maybe it may be very small little issues that change within a standard. For instance, you'll see a lot of times where we refer to a GED, and now we've gotten away from that because I don't even know how to say it, kind of to a company and not the overall education requirement. If it used to be that we would have to have that GED or a high school diploma, even if they had a college education. So we changed, a lot of little changes like that are made. And then we also have a lot of different certifications. So for instance, our school resource officers, it used to be in the past that there was no certification for school resource officer. This was something that was done at a local level. And the vast majority of these officers had school resource officer training, but there wasn't per se a certification. So just recently, again, the two divisions worked together. We put an advisory group together comprised of both sheriffs and chiefs. We looked at this and decided, you know, we do need to mandate a standard for our school resource officers. So that's something that we did, and there's training requirements for that now. So, you know, absolutely, these standards are constantly changing, and it's a big role of what both commissions do.
Another example, aside from the school resource officer certification, which is one of the numerous certifications that we have, is in the past few years, we've lowered the age for telecommunicator certification. Telecommunicators, as I mentioned, are certified under the Sheriff's Commission. And in the past, the minimum age requirement for them was 21, just like it is for deputies and detention officers. But there had been a lot of interest in pathways, maybe from, you know, high school to law enforcement. And then there's this gap from an 18-year-old to a 21-year-old. And as we, you know, studied it, it appeared that a lot of people that are in law enforcement, or a good number of them, had maybe started their career as a telecommunicator. And so certainly not every 18-year-old maybe is mature enough to be a telecommunicator, but recognizing that there are some that might want to enter this field, we lowered our age and, you know, as a result of that need. So that's something that's taken place in the last few years.
That's great. Thank you for that. So there's a wealth of background information required for applicants, such as fingerprint checks, which you all have mentioned, the physical and the psychological examinations. Do your commissions have a role in verifying whether all of these standards are diligently carried out by the local agencies? I know you said earlier that you audit them on occasion. Is that the extent of it?
Yes, ma'am. So again, when we're up to full staff, we're completing these audits every 4 years for these departments. And then, of course, if we ever receive any information, we can go and send one of these field reps to that department. For instance, if we hear maybe that they hadn't completed all their in-service or there was some confusion there, we'll go in there and look at that. But, you know, these departments certainly know we're looking over their shoulder. And so it's very rare that these standards are not followed. These chiefs want to do the right thing, and these sheriffs want to do the right thing. And so they certainly don't want to bring an officer in or a deputy in that's going to cause them problems, cause their community any problems or issues. So it's, you know, it's rare to find a situation where they have not done a thorough background and the paperwork as required by either standards division.
I'll just add on to that, as I had mentioned, on our side of the house, the agencies do have to submit the entire application packet, and we review every page of that packet. And if you've looked on our website, you'll see there are a lot of forms, and we do go through that pretty diligently. We also have field reps. We have 3 field reps who audit our agencies annually. This year, again, with COVID, they're doing it virtually. They're doing it via email and telephone and that sort of thing. But in the past, they would go and visit the sheriff's offices as well. And so they're getting the audit, they're sending in the packet, and then at the end of the year, there's also for both commissions or divisions, reporting of in-service training. So all agencies have to report at the end of the year whether or not their officers have completed the in-service training as required by the rules.
Gotcha. All right, so there's a list of offenses that an applicant may not have committed or been convicted of to be eligible for hire. If you can, explain a little bit about the difference between convicted or committed and why that language is a little bit different.
Sure. Again, both commissions have that wording, convicted or committed. For an example, if an officer has been charged with an offense, as Stephen, Director Combs had mentioned, we would wait for the court disposition in that case. We're not going to get involved till that happens. So if the officer is convicted, and if it is a crime that would be perhaps make him or her ineligible for certification, then we would go through that probable cause process. There may be the case where they're not convicted, but there may be some evidence to show that they committed the offense. the description of the offense per statute, you know, the elements of the offense, that sort of thing, even though for whatever reason they weren't convicted. Both commissions would still look at that as a possible issue for that officer certification.
I think a good example of that would be, I know at least on our side, is say you have an officer that was charged with a domestic violence. Sometimes these cases are dismissed because for whatever reason, the witness or the victim does not want to cooperate. So just because that case is dismissed, we're still going to look into that and conduct our investigation and go through our probable cause process, reference that officer. So that's the, you know, that really hits on this whole convicted versus commission of a crime.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that clarification. That really does make a lot of sense. So I appreciate that. And thank you both so much for your time today. I hope that your commissions will continue to be a resource for us as we sort of share this information with our members and learn more about what's going on with policing in the state of North Carolina. Is there anything that you think that our members should know that we didn't get a chance to share?
Well, I'd just like to say it's very refreshing that you're reaching out and that you're asking us these questions. So often we'll hear, even on the news, that, you know, different things that people just don't understand how the system works. So it's refreshing to know that you're asking and that you're educating yourselves. Especially in today's times, there have certainly been some things that have come up that are very concerning, but I just very much appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you both. And I hope that you stay safe and well, and I hope that we'll see you again soon for another information session. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, thanks, Andrea. We're on the right slide here. So our thanks to Aaron for those interviews. And now that we understand the state's role in establishing the minimum entrance standards for law enforcement officers, we wanted to connect with the practices of local agencies. And so, Andrea, if you go ahead to the next slide and start the next video, we've got an interview with a league member and a representative from a sheriff's department.
Go.
My name is Renee Kumar, and I've been a member of the League of Women Voters here in Henderson County since 1978. Today, I'm interviewing Lieutenant Andrew Anderson with the Henderson County Sheriff's Department. Lieutenant Anderson has been in law enforcement for 23 years and currently is head of the Division of Professional Responsibility. Lieutenant Anderson, thank you for joining us. And before we get further, I want, as a representative of the North Carolina League of Women Voters, I want to express our sorrow for the loss of our deputy in Henderson County in the line of duty. This loss makes us all mindful of the risks our deputies face as they choose to protect and serve us in our communities.
Thank you for saying that, Renee. We're definitely hurting here as an agency and a community, so thank you very much.
And with that, we also appreciate you taking the time to help us work at understanding policing in North Carolina better. And to start with that, I want you to please explain to everyone what your role in professional responsibility is as the division head.
Sure. The Division of Professional Responsibility includes human resources, all hiring, pay, anything related to human resources. I'm also over the evidence custodian. We have over 13,000 pieces of evidence in our evidence room. We're over equipment and fleet, this division is. Budget and finance, a $26 million budget. I oversee the budget section of that. So also, I'm a polygraph examiner. So there's a lot of different parts to our division. So I have to wear lots of hats. We all do.
And give us an idea of the size and breadth of the Sheriff's Department. How many employees do you have?
Sure. We have 155 sworn law enforcement officers. What that means is basically badge and gun carrying officers, 155, and we have 72 civilian staff. Civilian could include 911 operators, office people, anybody that doesn't carry a badge and a gun.
Well, that kind of gives us a segue into talking about how you find people to work at the Henderson County Sheriff's Department. How do you do recruiting, and what kind of goals do you have?
Fortunately, in the last couple of years, we haven't had to be very active in recruiting. What I mean by that is in the past, we have used social media platforms, law enforcement publications, and even hiring expos to go out and find candidates. For the last couple of years, we've had such a demand of folks that want to come work with us that we haven't had to use that. We've had lots of great candidates. Currently in our agency, we only have 4 openings. One time, quite a few years ago, we had around 30. Currently, we're operating off of 4, and of those 4 openings, we have names to fill into those gaps. That process takes a while. It's about a 2-month process, month and a half or 2 months to get someone from a conditional offer to actually hired and working.
Well, as the League of Women Voters, we'd like to know your demographic population. How many women do you employ, and are they difficult to recruit?
I don't have the exact numbers, Renee, of how many women. Women are not hard to get to work here. Where we struggle to get females is for positions, say, such as in the detention center and patrol. Traditionally, those have been male-dominated positions. We absolutely need women in detention and patrol, and our goal is to have women on each patrol squad. That is always something that we struggle with, is to try to get women to go into those more, how would you say, for lack of a better word, high-risk jobs. We need that. The community needs that, and that's where we have struggled in the past.
So of your 75 non-certified officers, those staff positions are easy to recruit women for, but for your 155 sworn officers, it's more difficult.
Very good way to put that. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And a lot of it too, it's not necessarily the circumstances of the job. A lot of it has to do with the schedule. The civilian staff mainly work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. The sworn positions or the positions in the jail work a more demanding schedule, a 12-hour shift that rotates from week to week. I think a lot of that has to do with the difficulty in getting female candidates.
What about with regard to recruiting minority candidates? I know we have about a 20% Latinx population and a 4% Black population in Henderson County. How is that recruitment going, or do you address that?
Very honestly, it's very similar to women. We would like to have Black males and females and Hispanic males and females. We don't have as many as we would like. That is definitely something that we want. We just don't get a whole lot of applications for people that are basic law enforcement training certified that want to come to our agency. We have, I can't give you exact numbers. We have both Black males and females and Hispanic males and females employed at the sheriff's office, but we would definitely like more, because ultimately that makes our life better for translation, for communications. It's very, very important, and we recognize that.
Well, let's go on, talk about hiring. I mean, you've explained the recruiting is this day and age for the Sheriff's Department, which suggests to me that the Henderson County Sheriff's Department is a place people want to work. So you have, by legislation, a minimum standard for criminal justice officers. And how do you work within that process? There are a state body of law plus administrative code that give you a lot of guidance as to the qualifications for people. I want you to outline how that works with your hiring process.
Sure. Our hiring process, we do go above and beyond what the state requires. Our hiring process consists of this: the application phase, where we get the application, we evaluate it to see if they're going to be a good fit for the agency, whether they're basic law enforcement trained certified or what other skills they have. If they make it past an application phase, it then goes into what's called a conditional offer phase, where we gather more information from them and get them to sign waivers saying that we can conduct background checks, drug tests, etc. After a conditional phase, then it goes into a background investigation. We have about a dozen background investigators that dig into everything from previous criminal activity to the finances, to credit situations. People that make it through the background investigation, that goes on to a spot that I specialize in, is pre-employment polygraph phase. This is not required with the state, but every person that comes to work at the Henderson County Sheriff's Office, whether it be a jail cook or a chief deputy, would have to go through a pre-employment polygraph. After that, we then send them through what's called FMRT, which is a company that does our drug test, our medical evaluation, and our psychological reviews. That test right there, our county is responsible. It's about $680 per person just for that one phase of this process. Our total investment in an applicant in Henderson County Sheriff's Office is anywhere between $1,400 and $1,600 a piece is what we basically spend to try to get a new applicant in the door.
Kind of when you talk about these face-to-face psychological interviews, what does that entail? Can you tell us?
Basically, it's a company that we contract with and other law enforcement agencies, and not just law enforcement, but other people use. The medical part is basically simply just a physical to make sure they're physically able to do the job. The psychological reviews is to make sure they don't have any ill wills towards certain groups of people, minorities, wherever they come from. All that is part of the psychological test. And the drug test is simply as it sounds, to see if any illegal substances are found in their blood.
So in this whole process of looking into everybody's background, you are pretty confident then that you're not going to find a candidate who has been a bad actor in another department, either in this state or in another state, and hire them.
Absolutely. Out-of-state candidates that are already police officers or in-state candidates that are already police officers, they go through the exact same process, but their process is also going to involve us going to their previous agency to look at personnel files, personnel reviews. So they go through the exact same thing or even more as just someone, say, off of the street that has applied.
And as you go through this process, what's the role of the administrative standards, minimum standards board for the sheriff's organization in North Carolina?
Are you talking about disqualifiers for employment? Is that kind of what you want to know?
Sure.
Let me give you just some disqualifiers for employment. Any felony convictions, a driving while impaired within the last 5 years, a dishonorable military discharge, criminal activity while employed, which kind of covers your last question about out of state. Faults are withholding information in the application process. If they intentionally withhold stuff that they don't want us to know and we'll find it out, they're automatically disqualified. Domestic violence, previous involuntary commitments, integrity issues, repeat traffic violations, late payments or negative credit reports, or a resignation from a former law enforcement position because of investigation into their duties.
Thank you. So after you've done all of this, how do you work to retain your officers?
I don't have an actual answer for that, but I will tell you, of being here for 23 years, we don't have very many people that leave here and go to other agencies. If people leave our agency, they usually maybe go into another profession. The selling point for Henderson County is Our starting salary is fair. Our benefit package to include insurance is outstanding. If you're a sworn law enforcement officer and live in the county or real close to the county, you have a take-home car. We have a wellness center where basically almost all of our minor medical care is taken care of. Our package here is what is the reason we only have 4 current openings.
Well, what is the starting salary for a new young officer?
A probationary candidate that's just finished basic law enforcement training, a person with no experience would start at $17.01 an hour. That could go up to someone experienced, very experienced, starting. The top end of that pay scale is $28.63. And that's as a new deputy sheriff with no experience to one that has experience.
Mm-hmm. And is your money for your salaries, that is all local county tax, or do you get federal or state funding for that?
That is all local Henderson County tax money. We do not use any federal funds or state funds for salary. We don't offer sign-on bonuses or tuition reimbursement either.
And give me one short, brief example of what the community colleges offer for basic law enforcement training, because
Sure.
that is a requirement every deputy has.
Yes, basic law enforcement training is taught locally here in Henderson County at Blue Ridge Community College. We do recruit, back on the recruiting, we do recruit out of that class. We have multiple deputy sheriffs, supervisors here at the sheriff's office that are state qualified teachers, so they meet these students, and we do recruit out of the local community college.
And the last question I have for you, we all know that a sheriff is the only constitutional office in our state constitution, and he has the ability to do something called at will. And how does that work with the staff that is almost mandated to be so professionally qualified?
At will is not really used a whole lot. I've heard that term for 23 years. It is, in reality, it is kind of that way across the state. It is more of something that's there in the Constitution, and it is used to protect the sheriff and the county. If he has a bad actor, he can, without cause, remove that person immediately. I think it's a good thing for that purpose. I think it's used kind of, in my 23 years experience, I've always heard it. I think the sheriff absolutely needs that ability to be able to remove a bad actor at any time that he sees fit.
And I have to say, I've lived in this county through 5 sheriffs, and every single one of them has worked very hard to make sure that his staff participates in this community. And I give the current Sheriff Griffin credit also. I see his staff sitting on many community boards and community problem-solving situations. Is that normal throughout our state, do you know?
I don't know if it's normal, but it's normal operating practice for us. We are the community. We live in the community, we work in the community, we play in the community. We want to be involved. And if we have a good relationship with the community, you see the support we have in the last week since we've lost a deputy sheriff in the line of duty. Our community supports us. It's because we're involved in the community and we want input.
Lieutenant Anderson, thank you so much for taking the time today to be a part of this process. And please let the sheriff know that I appreciate, and the League of Women Voters of North Carolina appreciates the time and effort that you and he have put into working with us.
Yes, ma'am, I sure will. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, Renee, for that interview. We would like to have had an interview with the police department too, but our working group did make contact with a few police departments, but we weren't able to get that done for this program. Here in Henderson County, we've got a small home team of 3 members who've met with a lot of our local officials, including our sheriff, so we weren't coming out of the blue when we approached him to ask him if he'd help us with this program. And if we have anybody out there tonight who has some good contacts with their local law enforcement agencies, we would certainly welcome your assistance in working with us to help ask them to participate in our next couple of programs that we're working on. And we understand tensions are running high, and we want to make it clear that we're not trying to put anybody on the spot or put them in a bad light or whatever the fear may be. And we're just trying to gather some information for our members. So as we're focusing on community involvement in policing, we wanted to share with you a couple of examples of what it looks like in the hiring area. Next slide, please. Here in Henderson County, our police chief recently resigned, and the city's in the process of hiring a replacement. As part of the process, the city asked for feedback from citizens in the form of a survey. Next slide, please. Across the state in Wilmington, a new chief of police was hired in June, and he has implemented citizen involvement on interview panels for hiring or promotion of its officers. Currently, citizens are included, as you see here, and they have plans to include community members for interview panels for the rank of police officer in the future. Next slide, please. And clearly, there are different aspects to a job in law enforcement that attract someone to it. And one question we might ask, which aspect or aspects of the job is your local agency emphasizing when looking to fill an opening? Probably the most important question to answer is why folks want to be in law enforcement. Especially right now when it seems to be an emotionally charged atmosphere. So are the people being hired for these positions seeking these jobs because they want to serve their communities? What qualities are the departments looking for in their applicants? And would the community and the departments agree on what those qualities should be? Next slide, please. Just a reminder, we'll be taking a more in-depth look of oversight at our program in November. And we're all familiar with internal affairs from movies and TVs and how officers with the duty of policing the police, so to speak, are often portrayed negatively. In our oversight program, we'll look at what is called professional standards in the real world and see what we can find out. We'll also look at some examples of communities who have instituted some sort of civilian oversight of their law enforcement agencies. Next slide, please. We mentioned last month about the Task Force on Racial Equity and Criminal Justice. They're conducting public meetings and you can view them on YouTube. And you might want to note that the third and final public comment session is coming up on October 16th. And you can sign up as an individual to speak if you have anything to say to the task force. Next slide, please. Another resource we found in our research was the University of North Carolina's Criminal Justice Innovation Lab. And if you visit their website, you're going to find many interesting studies and projects on various areas of criminal justice, not just policing. Next slide, please. And a last reminder that the two state commission we talked about tonight have their meetings coming up in November. And though we don't know what COVID has in store for us all, you can check in with them if you are in the area and if you're interested in attending some of their meetings. They seem very open to having people observe. Next slide, please. As always, we welcome your feedback. You can send us an email. We had a lot to cover tonight, so our time is just about up. And we are hoping that we'll see you next month on our next program on training. And I think that's all we have. You got anything, Andrea? You good?
I just didn't know if you had any questions. I know y'all are monitoring the chat, but
yeah, we had a few we've tried to answer as we went. And I know you said you were gonna be sending the recording of this in a follow-up email.
yes, I will do that. And we'll send a link so that you can sign up for the next one in October. The registration is open for that.
Very good. All right, with that, we say thank you and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Andrea, check your chat.
Okay, I will check my chat.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Somebody says our local police chief